All right. May I confirm that everyone can see my screen right now?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay.
Also, I've
So
started the recording.
you started the recording? Great. Okay.
Yes.
So thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate all of your time today. I know we all have probably a lot of work to do still, and some home time and evening time for yourselves as well. But I just want to let you know how much appreciate the chance to talk to you. And we are going to cover, some problems that we see in the Salesforce DevOps community, particularly, overall issues with Salesforce DevOps. On top of that, tools issue or change management issues. And then, we're going to talk about, if your team is looking to, investigate and review a Salesforce DevOps solution, things that you want to consider while you're going through the procurement process. And so I will reiterate that, I am the only Garnet Belik on LinkedIn. So that if you all want to reach out to me directly and connect, I know that some of you like Srahar Garapati and Maner Budumala have already reached out. So if you just want to connect on LinkedIn and share our connection sometime down the road, that would be so. We wanted to start our conversation today about why DevOps projects fail. And as you can probably appreciate, this space has gotten better and better over time, but it's gotten better and better over time because, as we know, for the most part, Salesforce is a huge juggernaut of a successful software story, and they leave it to third-party implementators to implement, and so they are bringing implementation resources on board, but ultimately, you're going to be dealing with a third party for implementing your success or implementing internally with your internal skill set. So what are some of the things that lead to this sort of historical lack of success, which is improving? Part of it is that it is an evolving ecosystem. As some of you may or may not know, it is a huge growing system. The Salesforce SI community is worth like $43 billion US. So it's an incredibly robust practice. But as we can see in the bottom right here, it is based on a number of historical tools. So whether that be Git or whether that be Jenkins, it is based on tools that were not specifically designed for Salesforce. And that brings in part of the problems that we see in the community. So as we continue the discussion, all of this sort of leads to a lack of cohesion. So ultimately, what you're going to find is that you're going to have sort of two decisions to make ultimately when you're deciding on tools. And that may be, am I going to go with the best of breed type of solution, or am I going to go to the one that is either the best well-known or the most integrated with our business? And ultimately, that is the decision based on each of your individual needs. But we're going to sort of discuss what those may look like in a little bit more detail in our conversation. So, this quote, DevOps promise goes unfulfilled. I would say that this particular quote is a little bit antiquated. On the right-hand side, there's comments like developers want to automate mundane process to increase productivity. That is absolutely correct. Devs and consultants want to build, test, and release as much as possible to keep things going on time and on budget. That's absolutely correct as well. And in the past, and not too long ago, there was a thought that, many customers don't believe that DevOps improves productivity. I would say that absolutely everyone that we talk to believes that wholeheartedly at this time. Same thing for, with this quote about most cases, customers find that agility and speed promised of DevOps solutions is found only in marketing brochures. Also not correct. We have found that we're able to deliver a very specific return on investment as well as a payback period with our solution. And again, that's something that we can talk about over time. And again, all the players in this space deliver that as well. And again, net, there's this concept that, given the DevOps, due to the poor performance of various solutions, and I will say once again, that all the solutions that I'm going to mention today, in addition to Flosum, all of them deliver a lot of value to their clients, and all of them have different things for you to consider as we discuss our time together. So, ultimately, there's sort of two main reasons why DevOps projects can fail. So one is a culture issue. As you know, change management within an organization is, always a challenge. Ultimately, when you bring a new solution on board, you need to have that advocate, you need to have that training, you need to have that enablement, you need to have the collaboration of all the teams, not just Salesforce IT, but also security, also compliance, ultimately all of the individuals that are going to be benefiting from that tool. And we need to get them understanding the strengths of the tool and using it. And on the right-hand side, I mentioned that it is a tools issue. And obviously, Salesforce DX, as well as the upcoming DevOps suite, have their strengths absolutely, and as does Git and as does Jenkins. But ultimately, particularly Git, was not made for Salesforce. So there are many ways, for example, with the concept of XML reordering, which is very relevant for Salesforce. Git does not enable that sort of functionality, and that sort of shortcoming is something that Flosum and the other solutions in this space have conquered over time. So again, we have a cultural issue, we have a tools issue, and so what we want to do is make it easy to learn and easy to use. So, I just highlighted a couple of these with these check marks. You guys are always looking for source repositories so that you can easily work from a common code base. I think that goes without saying. And I would say the vast majority of you are using Git at this time. And so you just need to have some sort of repository and some sort of version control. And again, version control is a must, not just at the repository level, which would typically be a clone of production, but also at the component level. So you want to see, what your March, your April, your May versions look like, so that if you are having, a functionality issue, you want to have that capability to roll back to those prior versions that were functioning as you wanted them. And then, in the top right here, keeping Sandbox in sync is pivotal. I think we all know that, with very highly nimble teams, very highly structured acceleration, very highly structured deployments, you don't want to be spending time refreshing and don't want to be spending time syncing. So that ultimately, if there is a way to accelerate that type of process, ultimately we want to see that happen, right? And so I think that, I input a couple of, I would use the term, attempts to be humor in my deck today. So I can't hear you guys. So in case I'm totally bombing out there, I just wanted to, add a little bit of levity every once in a while. So as we can appreciate, the office has a lot of great humor, and obviously Salesforce training is a bit of, obviously it's self-learned and self-guided for the most part. And this image on the right, I enjoyed quite a lot. The Bears beats Battlestar Galactica. If you haven't seen that particular episode, please go and have a look at that on YouTube. It's really quite funny. So to follow up the conversation, ultimately, what we're seeing is that there are Git level skills and admin level skills. And I think as everyone hopefully on the call will understand, a Git skill set is a programmatic skill set. It's a developer skill set. And ultimately, all of the solutions have huge amounts of functionality based on Git. Flosum does have some unique characteristics there, which we'll mention in a minute. But, we are also developed for that admin level skill set. Because as everybody knows, when you're doing declarative changes, it's obviously much simple. It's faster, there's an ease to it, upgrades are faster, does not require those programmatic skills. But ultimately, you want to be able to have a tool that works both with declarative level skills as well as developer level skills. And again, that's where we enter the marketplace as well. So to put all that together, you can certainly consider sticking with Git, sticking with, a very simple, fundamental basic program that delivers you your version control in your repository. That's absolutely, makes sense to me. But I do feel that all of the purpose-built solutions offer a high degree of value compared to using Git alone. So I will emphasize that GearSet and AutoRabbit and Catapult, those are what I would call the Git-based solutions. So all three of those are basically a very nice, useful wrapper, a UI that's typically in Salesforce that connects to Git. So all of those solutions have incredible functionality and are very useful. But if you are going to consider either of those, I would also please ask that you consider Flosum as well, because in addition to our bidirectional sync with Git, we also have native version control, native repository, which means that our repository or version control is literally built into Salesforce. And so therefore you can sort of have your cake and eat it too, meaning that you can have native version control, which has higher levels of functionality, as well as bidirectional sync to Git. And so as we sort of continue that part of the conversation, this is sort of a summary of the functionality that we see day in and day out that our customers end up appreciating in Flosum. So first off would be federal level security. So Flosum can be provisioned directly into a federal organization, into their production account, meaning that there's no need for connection to Git, and therefore it sort of inherits certain aspects of the federal security that they're looking for. Again, because we are built 100% for Salesforce, in Salesforce, we understand all Salesforce componentry. So meaning that, whether it be the more complex natures of various aspects of Salesforce, we have functionality built for that. On top of that, we have very flexible branching strategy. So what that means is typically Git solutions have a very structured happy path where you need to follow sort of a Git-based flow. Whereas due to the dynamic nature of our solution, you're able to basically set up any branching strategy that you require. Another issue that we solve very nicely is the concept of true semantic comparisons. So what you'll see in the tools universe is that in certain scenarios, when you're comparing XML, it may reveal a lot of false conflicts. So an example of that would be, you have a permission or a profile that has a pick list, and in target, you have 8 items, and in source, you have the same 8 items, but in different order. And so what a Git-based solution will do is it will basically show that, what am I trying to say? It'll show that if they're out of the same order, it'll surface those as false conflicts, and therefore will require investigation to make sure that they are indeed the same list. But with when you're built for Salesforce in Salesforce, that we do something called intelligent XML reordering, which reorders both target and source and basically matches up accurately. So as you can see, in the rest of this list here, we can actually guarantee no code overrides. We can accelerate profile and permission management. We have a concept of release autofix, which is intelligence built into our deployment analyzer, which can show you when your deployments may fail ahead of time. Again, we have native repository, but also bidirectional sync with Git, and we have functionality like a one-click rollback. So all of these are tools or functionality that we've been getting over the last 8 years of our existence. We are a product-led company, so we continue to develop and add functionality based on feedback from our clients. And again, these are just things that you should consider when you're looking at a purpose-built solution specifically for Salesforce. Okay, so to take a step back, what do we want to do when we are evaluating a DevOps solution for Salesforce? So first off, just like we talked about, you want to make sure that you're overcoming the pain points that you guys are experiencing at this time. So whether it be deployments taking along, so needing to accelerate them, hard to deploy certain components, you want to make sure that all Salesforce components are recognized, having those advanced functionality like rollback, concerns like we mentioned about overwriting other code, limited visibility to other people's work. All of these are issues that you want to consider. And so when you're reviewing your DevOps solution, you want to make sure that you keep these things in mind so that your pain points are surfaced very early when you're in discussions with a purpose-built vendor. And obviously, getting all your cards on the table earlier rather than later, and sharing your branching strategy and sharing your details is really quite fundamental towards making sure that the solution that you're looking for is able to be provided by, who you're discussing your solution with. So I think it goes without saying that, you need to be very clear on your needs and requirements. So, obviously having a single stakeholder that's consolidating the approach, let's call it your advocate that, is looking for the solution is what you want to make sure that you have that individual running that project. Clearly, you want to have a lot of details about things like your branching strategy and your integrations and who all of your users are going to be, so that when you are getting into your engagement, that you have a really good understanding of what the project is going to be look like. And then on top of that, all of the vendors, ourselves, AutoRabbit, Gearset, and Catapult, they all offer additional functionality beyond just the acceleration of release management. So whether that be data migration, backup and recovery of your orgs, test automation, security solutions, you just want to make sure that you've had done a bit of a market survey, a market scan, so that you're aware of, who you want to be talking to, and making sure that you're taking action and looking in those regards. So, I mentioned flexible branching strategy a moment ago. As you can see in the top right here, it isn't just about what the business process is or your Salesforce development, software development lifecycle process is, but it's the additional steps that you're going to be taking beyond just moving your code and your releases along. So obviously aspects of quality gates, your approval processes, your code quality, are you going to be syncing with the test automation tool? These are all things that you want to keep in mind. And as we can appreciate, when we're a smaller team, which we can support, or a team in the hundreds with dozens of production orgs, you want to make sure that your branching strategy is very clearly communicated to all the parties involved, and your software development lifecycle strategy is very clearly communicated, so that it can be very well understood, and that your solution is going to provide the acceleration that you're looking for in that regard. Okay. So we do like to talk about security here. So as you can appreciate, nothing is more important than the security of your Salesforce org. And therefore, you just want to make sure that ultimately speaking, in my opinion, that the solution that you're dealing with is native. What you'll see in a moment here is that there are a number of different aspects of nativity in the Salesforce landscape, in the DevOps landscape. And, to be candid, Flosum is the only solution that's truly native. So again, what we mean for that is that because we're built in Salesforce for Salesforce, and because we have native version control and native repository, Flosum can be delivered to you either as a Salesforce enterprise org that you attach all of your sub accounts to, and therefore you do all of your develop or your DevOps in the Flosum org, or it can be provisioned directly in your production. And so either case, in those scenarios, we never see one line of code or one byte of client data, and therefore you're completely protected in that regard. Again, something that I think is very important in that aspect. So again, these are the compliance and attestations are things that you want to consider, and when you're sort of developing your conversation, either internally or with a vendor. I do feel that you do want to obviously, without saying, you're going to know what your industry regulations are and what you need to sort of protect them. On top of that, you don't want to know what your data residency requirements are. So, for example, we've had clients where they must have Australian data residency, and Australian data residency from a Salesforce org perspective, it needs to be acquired on an exception basis. So we can solve data residency with Flosum and deliver Australian data residency, but it requires a lot of extra heavy lifting because of curtailment on the current data centers in Australia. So these are the types of things that you'll want to look at, and the same thing for who will have access to your data. So again, unfortunately, the other purpose-built solutions, they do typically either ask you to whitelist a URL or essentially give you backdoor access. it is on a limited perspective. So obviously you'll just want to have those conversations with your security team. And again, with Flosum, because we're delivering it either as an enterprise org that we hand over the credentials to you, or we deliver it directly into production as a managed package, we never have access to any of that information. So, ultimately compliance, ultimately data residency, ultimately privacy are some of the most important things for you to consider when you're evaluating a Salesforce DevOps solution. These are the higher picture issues. Obviously, you just want to make sure that you have a huge level of awareness when you're comparing the vendors in the space to each other. And again, I feel very strongly that Catapult and GearSet and AutoRabbit all offer a lot of value. I highly recommend that you consider them. But if you're considering them, we just also ask that you consider Flosum as well. So here's my second slide for trying to have a little bit of levity. Hopefully you guys are all awake back there, and hopefully diving into dinner if that's your time right now. But obviously, we just do appreciate the Salesforce universe, and again, I really appreciate the chance to talk to your team here today. And obviously, there's a lot of memes out there for to bring a little bit of levity into the Salesforce universe. Okay, so a moment ago we talked about the concept of there's ultimately going to be a couple of decisions for you to consider when you're selecting one solution to another, and those two solutions are typically what is the best of breed. So maybe you're comparing Provar to Tosca to other solutions to Selenium in the test automation space, or are you considering the one that's most highly integrated with your company at this time? So that might be ADO, Azure DevOps, part of the Microsoft universe. So the areas that we see the most common need for integration are in the typical developer tools, right? So we've already talked about version control, how making sure that you have easy access to again bidirectional sync to Git is incredibly important. Regression and testing automation, Provar, Tosca, Selenium, all of these are ones that you want to consider very highly. I'll also mention agile management systems. Obviously, if you have a medium or larger organization, you're going to be using Jira or ServiceNow or ADO, and you just want to have a full understanding of what that integration would look like. When you're discussing Salesforce DevOps solutions with vendors. Obviously, code quality as well, whether that be Apex PMD or checkmarks or the other code scanning tools. Again, Flosum does come out of the box with Apex PMD, but the other solutions offer different levels of functionality. And you just want to make sure that when you're selecting your DevOps tool that you're in full alignment with your code quality standards. On top of that, all of the solutions are going to have purpose-built functionality for the main managed packages that are part of the Salesforce universe. So whether that be Encino or Viva or Velocity, in our scenario, we'll talk about in a moment, we accelerate with data migration. So the configuration of those applications that typically need to start in the developer sandbox, and then typically need to get manually redone, in UAT and redone in testing and redone in all of your senior environments. We can accelerate that aspect of it as well. And then finally, the IDE editors like IntelliJ and VS Code. So I to come back to that conversation about declarative versus programmatic. Obviously, you ultimately, when you're a medium and larger team, you're going to need that programmatic skill set beyond the declarative, and these IDEs help accelerate the developer push of code into the Salesforce DevOps tool. And again, also having harmonization with a declarative skill set we feel is very important as well. So I'll just sort of just summarize really quickly the scope of what we offer for your consideration. So release management, again, that's the acceleration of your CI/CD processes with pipeline automation. And again, you really just want to make sure that is the core acceleration benefit that you're going to be receiving with your Salesforce DevOps tool. Again, the Git-based solutions have a certain ballpark of acceleration, and Flosum has a different ballpark of acceleration because we're built in Salesforce for Salesforce. But again, I feel very strongly that all of them provide a lot of value. So, just really consider them openly. On top of that, we have a data migrator, which I just mentioned a moment ago. So this isn't the migration of client data, but it's the migration of either test data. So as you all know, when you're developing and your production account is growing and you're adding functionality to production, you ultimately want a version of a subset of your production data. Hopefully it'll be obscured, hopefully it'll be masked, hopefully it'll be anonymized if need be in your lower environment, so that your developers, your testers, your QA, your UAT teams have the latest versions of all of that data. And so that's what our data migration tool does. And then on top of that, as I mentioned a moment ago, we also accelerate the configuration data of those managed packages. So whether it be CPQ with your price book, or Viva with your configurations, or Velocity or Encino, you don't have to redo all of those configurations from one environment to the other. You basically do them once in your Viva sandbox and then push them into the higher environments with a click of a button. So, with a little template-based setup, it accelerates the later stages of that. And then again, data backup and recovery is something that is relevant for almost all organizations. So whether it be, Own Backup or Flosum or the other solutions that are out there, ultimately, as I think most of you probably know, the price of backup and recovery from the mothership from Salesforce becomes more and more expensive over time. And ultimately, having it built within a third-party solution is something that's going to lower your cost base and therefore lower your total cost of ownership over time for backup and recovery. So sorry about this slide here; it's really bright, but Flosum is also offering a new product for security starting in Q2 and then rolling out through the rest of the year. So you might also want to consider looking at solutions like App Omni or DigiSec, which offer various aspects of solutions of security. So, for example, App Omni specializes in the security and access controls. So as we know, with permissions and profiles, the cloning of them, the changing of them, they basically, as permissions and profiles can be quite a busy matrix of different permissions and profiles over time. And so ultimately, when you continue to copy them in, Accenture has said that in 2026, I think that 99% of Salesforce orgs will have vulnerabilities because of that. So it's definitely something to consider. And the same thing for the introduction of potential code-based vulnerabilities. So again, that would be in the DigiSec ballpark, as well as our security solution handles both of these. And so what, again, they specialize in is the scanning of the code to continue to monitor for vulnerabilities. And again, happy to discuss these with any of your teams, offline after this session. But it's just things for you to consider. I mean, just making sure that you have a plan to make sure that your security is maintained. That's the main thing I want to get across here today. So as you'll also see in the space, the various tools are extendable and customizable. So first off, is the tool customizable? And then what is the level of experience or skill required? And what is the cost of those customizations? So again, with Flosum, because we're architected in Salesforce, the declarative Salesforce skill set is adequate to basically add functionality. So, we come out of the box with four Flosum roles. So, view only, review only, deploy, and I think it's a quality one. Sorry, there's four of them. But if those four are not exactly what you're looking for, then they can be amended. And if you feel the need to add a fifth one for a special case, like for example, your North American team versus your offshore team, then that's another way that they can be extended. And then the final thing there is that what is the cost of those customizations? So again, if you're able to do those customizations yourself with a reasonable skill set, then the cost is effectively like zero from the need to get it into budget. Obviously, your time is very valuable, so that's a different story. But if it's a more developed skill set and you have to go to the vendor to get those customizations done, then that's a whole different ball of wax, and that needs to be added into your procurement process. So just something for you to consider and to think about. So, usability and ease of adoption. So, is the solution easy to use for all team members? Is knowledge of Git required? So again, the skill set of Git is incredibly common in, the programmatic for Salesforce universe, right? So all developers and many consultants are going to have that skill set ultimately. But at the same time, for much smaller firms, for smaller organizations that are really have, smaller teams, admin level skill set, there are tools out there, again, that can be used with that skill set as well. Does the solution support the size of your development team? Again, believe it or not, we sort of started in the small and medium size business market. So we have many clients with 1 or 2 or 3 licenses, because it really is, the admin, a couple developers or a consultant that's working on the development, typically people that are wearing multiple hats in addition to their Salesforce chores. But on top of that, Flosum has many global enterprise customers that have hundreds of developers on their teams, enormously complex branching strategies, dozens of, over a dozen production accounts. So just making sure that the solution that you end up selecting is able to fit the needs of the size of your organization. And again, is the user interface friendly? I would say that all of them are friendly now. So typically they're pretty much all based on the Salesforce UI. Again, most of them connecting to Git, and ours not needing Git, although that is a capability of ours as well. So for the most part, you'll find that the user friendliness of all the purpose-built solutions is quite good now. So specific functionality to consider. So this is definitely going to align with your pain points. So what are the pain points that you're seeing the most commonly, and does the solution meet them well? So again, under the presumption that you either have been using chain sets and have had frustration, or you have a Git-based solution but you want a little bit more ease of access to it. I think those are the main things that you want to consider, in the early stages of your decision-making process. But then as you go into deeper levels of comparing one solution to another, you want to go into deeper levels of comparing functionality. So one of those areas might be merge conflicts. So does the solution provide a merge editor? How tedious is the merging of branches? Do the conflicts have to be resolved manually? Can the solution detect declarative changes? I think you'll all sort of appreciate the fact that, again, all the solutions have strengths and weaknesses. And again, we talked about that concept of XML reordering, which is very important to sort of doing aspects of this automatically. And again, when you're investing in these purpose-built solutions, I would certainly recommend visiting any or all of them. But if you're, again, investigating the others, please compare them to Flosum. Same thing for branching strategy. So nothing is worse than getting either a clogged pipeline or having a release branch that has to be rebuilt and doing repetitive work. So again, how much time is required for your team to maintain the branching strategy? So I've had discussions where some tools require up to a 10-to-1 developer to deployment manager sort of orchestration. So you just want to make sure that as your team develops and grows, that you have obviously the right number of developer resources and the right number of deployment resources and testing and QA, et cetera. And again, obviously we feel that we have a lot of strengths in the flexibility of our branching strategy. So again, something for you to consider as you're evaluating the tools in the space. Sandbox Synching. Oh my God, how many times have I heard this about the level of pain that's involved in Sandbox Synching? So obviously, a lot of this is based on business process, right? So typically you would develop and develop and develop and develop and develop, and then you maybe have a monthly or a quarterly refresh, and then you would continue from that point. We see a lot of shared sandboxes. We see a lot of things that they kind of create problems based on not following best practices. So obviously we have a lot of discussions about best practices during our implementation phase with our clients. And again, I will emphasize that because our branching strategy is very flexible, the best practice that we see with our Flosum clients is that once a deployment is released into production, you would basically back up that version of production once it's accepted. That would become your new master repository, again, inside Flosum. So because we have native repository there, it would be inside Flosum. And then you can use that native repository to effectively back promote into your dev accounts so that your dev accounts can have all of the metadata changes in their accounts without the need to wipe out everything. And, for example, what one of our clients has asked is that during that business process, can we apply an acceptance or an approval from the developer that owns the sandbox? Because if there is work that is I'll use the term, in conflict with the current production, but it's something that he or she is adding, and you don't want it wiped out because it's, again, a new project that they're going to be adding to a future release. Obviously, that's something that they can approve or decline, and meaning that they can make sure that they only receive the changes that they want. And again, we have that ability to 100% guarantee no code overwrite. So this is an example of another one of those benefits. So to continue the conversation, out of sequence deployments, this is something that we see all the time. Clogged pipelines, you really want to have the flexibility of making sure that that doesn't occur for you. So again, Git has certain limitations in that regard. Again, we bidirectionally sync with Git. And again, because we have a flexible branching strategy that we can basically partition out certain aspects of a deployment, we have a lot of flexibility to ensure that out of sequence deployments don't clog pipelines. And again, we talked about data migrator. So making sure that you have the capabilities for not just your metadata, so the declarative and the programmatic changes that your team is making, but also the application-based configuration data. So again, that's the Viva, Velocity, and CPQ story. So we talked about this, briefly. I think this is repetitive, sorry. So obviously, we talked about extendability and just making sure that your team has the skill set to do those customizations, or a very clear understanding of what the cost base is going to be for making those customizations. So, just a clear level of visibility. Okay, so here's my gentle attempt at another line of levity. So talking about procurement, obviously, I do alliances and I facilitate the procurement and engagement of Flosum with global GSIs and integrating firms and implementation firms, managed services practices. So ultimately, we get into some aspect of a referring or reselling or managed services relationship with our partners. And again, they have an incredible uptake on this simply because we deliver quantifiable ROI and payback period for helping accelerate their Salesforce DevOps processes. So ultimately, what that means is that we help deliver more functionality faster to their clients. And when we, again, from the client perspective, we're removing their pain points that we discussed about in terms of deployments taking too long, not understanding all Salesforce components, etc. So it really is ultimately making the client's life better, and then I do that by facilitating it through Salesforce integrators. So I do want to emphasize that when you're going through your procurement process, obviously there is a lot of information out there. We find that from a buyer's perspective, that pretty much 60 to 85% of all product research is done before they even reach out to us directly. So they've gone to the App Exchange to look at the 5-star testimonials, the 5-star ratings and the testimonials. We have over 250 5-star ratings, something that we're very proud of. So something for you to consider. G2 also, if you don't know that, that's a review consolidator. So it's basically having the ability to not hear from the vendor, but to hear from the vendor's users, their customers, their partners, who's actually be using it. So if you wanted to go check out like Flosum versus Catapult on G2, you could easily do that, and you could see in a lot of detail what the people are saying about those two. Obviously, referrals from peers. This is probably the most important one, right? So as you all know, you went to school with people and you've worked with people, and you've gone around the world with people, and hearing feedback from your friends, from your colleagues, from your current coworkers, from your past coworkers. I feel like all of that is very, very important for you to evaluate when you're discussing who you're going to be going with from a solution perspective. And then also, what is the team familiar with? So this is something that affects us quite a bit. So as we've said, a Git-based solution is sort of the main ballpark of the other competitors that I talked about today. And again, we do have bidirectional sync with Git, but because we're built in Salesforce for Salesforce with all of those benefits that I talked about, there's also a learning curve. And the learning curve is brief and it is short. It's literally hours as opposed to weeks and months, but it's relevant, right? Obviously, familiarity often wins the case. And I just find that that's something very important for you to consider, meaning that if you do want to consider Flosum in the future and you have like huge Git components, like it must be Git or nothing, then that's something that you're going to have to talk about internally and potentially win over some individuals on your side before considering something like Flosum, which has a different architecture. So, there's cost and there's price, right? So, what's the dollar amount that it's going to take in terms of getting this solution in your pocket? But what is that's the price, but what is the cost? And so what I mean by that is that, as an example, Flosum has a very, very short time to value period. Like, believe it or not, we can get people onboarded and using Flosum literally in an afternoon and seeing value and doing deployments like literally within a day or two. Git-based solutions typically take, 3 to 4 to 6 weeks to get access to Git. And then again, there are the aspects of functionality on Git-based solutions. And then on top of that, again, the ancillary costs. So what does the support look like? What does the enablement look like? What does the training look like? All of these things can be ticketed items. And typically, most of these are done on a complimentary basis, particularly the training, which I'll talk about in a moment. So, in a couple seconds here, I'll show you how you could actually, start your Flosum training in literally like 60 minutes worth of on-demand videos. And it's a complimentary program, and it's a certification that you can certainly add to your LinkedIn profile, which, there's literally 5,000 Flosum users around the globe. Oh, and here it is. And so our certification program has 2 levels at this time, and we're building a next level on top of that. So again, professional level certification in Flosum, what that means is you basically have a good understanding of the tool and understanding the core, I would use the term business positioning or functionality positioning. So it's basically 60 minutes of on-demand videos with a 15-minute quiz, delivers you a certification that you can post on LinkedIn. And again, if you do end up going through the professional certification, I know many of you have already, and if you end up doing it, it would be great if you could tag myself or tag Flosum. I'd really appreciate that. And then on top of that, we have expert level. Expert level is where we take it one step further. It's kind of like a trailhead experience where we deliver a complimentary trial org. We deliver trailhead type of learning experience, self-led learning, and it basically gives you the ability to learn and understand the tool. And if we are doing that for your organization because you're considering procuring Flosum, we can actually do guided sessions as well. So we can do this with live feedback and live live delivery. So again, something for you to consider, just making sure that other solutions, if they are charging you for that, just to make sure that you fully understand that and understand the value of what that might look like. So I know this is a little on the self-serving basis, but when you're procuring one of these solutions, you just want to make sure that you go through a process that makes sense for your organization. So what we typically see is most of the people that we talk to, they typically review 2 to 4 solutions in quite a bit of detail. I would recommend that you consider taking 2 or 1 or 2 of them through the concept of a POC if you're not quite sure on the functionality differences between them. As a reminder, when you're going through a proof of concept, that you want to make sure that you're advocating internally so that the person who's most interested in working with one of the DevOps solutions is in tight communication with the person that's going to write the check, because you don't want to surprise them at the end and say, oh, we want, this amount of money for Salesforce DevOps when it hasn't been expected in the budget. You want to get them on board as soon as possible so that basically they can be a strong advocate for the solution as well. And then again, you want to make sure that when you are evaluating the multiple solutions out there, that you have a clear understanding of the return on investment or the payback period so that you are able to communicate that to your financial stakeholders. And so again, when you're doing that proof of concept, make sure that you set up a very clear internal standards for criteria for success. Set the time and scope of that review so that it isn't a long project, that it's nice and quick. Limit the number of users to just those key stakeholders for your Salesforce DevOps so that you have very clear, concise communication between that group. If it gets too large, I would say beyond 2 or 3, there's going to be a lot of different perspectives, so you want to kind of keep that consolidated. Again, if you are the advocate and you're hearing a lot of voice of dissent, make sure that you basically, you need to talk to those people individually and either win them over or acknowledge the fact that, it may be going in the direction of their dissent, if that makes sense. So just really communicating with all the people on the inside, because like I said, because we're not Git-based, we see it all the time where people refuse to deviate off of a Git-based solution. And so again, we have a lot of strengths beyond that, but it's just something for you to consider. And then again, keep that financial decision maker on board and confirm, just walk through your use cases and confirm your ROI with the tool that you select. So again, this is a little salesy, so sorry about that, guys. But ultimately, when you're talking about ROI, you want it to be very quantifiable, right? So in our case, in this particular example, we measured 1,100 plus deployments on the bottom line here. And we saw that we had a near 46% decrease in manual steps through automation. What that actually led to directly is a near 2-hour time savings per deployment. So that represented about a 66% decrease. And so this is, fundamentally, I'm talking to one group right now, is that they're just getting Flosum because they want to make sure that people get home at a reasonable time on Saturdays on deployment weekends, right? So it's just really a sort of a human need, and obviously it's a business need too. So with these processes, we do see a near 42% increase in automated changes and a near halving of non-release deployments. So non-release deployments being hot fixes. And so again, with our solution, when you get it right the first time, there's no need for hot fixes for the most part. So, I'm a little bit tight on time, but just really, really quickly, I just want to sort of talk about the fact that it isn't just buying the solution and getting it into your hands. It's really after the sales service. These are all the things that you really want to know before you buy, right? During your procurement cycle. So first and foremost, a lot of details about implementation support. If they're not delivering you a customer success happy path during the sales process, explaining to you what enablement looks like, explaining to you what that time frame looks like, basically I would expect like a timeline of number of engagements per week, time commitment and personnel commitment for those engagements, and when you would expect to achieve independence from the vendor. I mean, those are all things that you want to consider. And again, things like the training programs that if you can do them for free beforehand, it enables your team to become accelerated even before you have access to a solution. So again, something for your teams to consider. So, same thing for, the kickoff call, Catapult success. You just want to make sure that you have a very clear vision again into what you're getting into for procurement, and what the expectation is when we be using 80% of the solution's functionality, and how many sessions will that take and how much time will that take. I think that's pretty fundamental. Okay, here's my last attempt at levity, Catapult. There are not a lot of funny images on the internet about Catapult, so this is the one that I threw in there to hopefully break up the monotony of the chat today. But just to continue the conversation, again, training and enablement is really fundamental. So I personally train partners, our customer success team trains clients, and we just have a lot of functionality that we're continuously delivering. And believe it or not, we grant access to our customer success portal, during the sales and procurement process, because we want people to see our resources, our videos, our implementation guide, all those details. So ultimately, if you guys reach out, I can certainly help you with that as well. So you can learn more about Flosum as well. Upcoming releases, guides, all that information is incredibly important. The one thing that I think is important for you to keep in mind here is that I would personally not consider buying something that is dependent on a roadmap or dependent on a feature to be added. So as you can probably appreciate, a new feature may just be a slight amendment or a slight curtailment of an existing feature, right? But I would personally buy only what I see, only what can be proven to me to be in existence at this time. That's my approach towards selling or positioning, and I think it should be something that you should consider for buying, because of the fact that as you can probably appreciate, just like your firm has so many things on backlog that you're working on, software development firms are typically in the same scenario. And obviously, if you want to split the hair, I would say, ask the question, is it on roadmap or is it being built right now? If it's being built right now, it'll probably be there in the next quarter. If it's on roadmap, you just really have no concept of when it's going to be able to get delivered. So, the final thing, I know I touched on this a little bit, but what is going to be the cadence and the pricing of your support? So, this